Awesome. Thanks again for being here. My topic today is titled From Ideation to Release. What I'm going to be covering for the next 60 minutes is how you can implement a DevOps workflow, mainly to focus on how to promote the workflow, information flow throughout the software development process, and also to increase or make your feedback cycles, amplify your feedback cycles so you can take key decisions at a very, very early stage during the life cycle. So before I get started, a quick introduction about myself. My name is Bhushan. I'm a technical account manager at Atlassian. I've been working with the Atlassian ecosystem for over 6 years now. And in those 6 years, I've pretty much played a role of everything you can think of with the Atlassian products: an administrator, an add-on developer, an implementation consultant. I've done training. And if there's any developers in the house here, Java developers, great. So most of the Atlassian products also have an extensible API, so if you're interested in learning more about development of Atlassian add-ons for the marketplace, I run my own website called jiradev.com, which is a bunch of tutorials to help you get started. Cool. So before I get started, I'd like to know the audience a little bit more. How many of you here have heard of a company called Atlassian before? Awesome. How many of you have used our tools before? Great. So let's get started. I'm going to be covering the 4 different aspects of the software development lifecycle: the planning and prioritizing of the work, actual development and code reviews, and deployment, and also defining to start with all of these items. We're going to be using 4 different tools to actually implement this DevOps workflow. Confluence is a requirements, it's actually a documentation tool where you can have different blueprints for your product requirements. You can capture meeting notes. Anything to do with documents and files resides in Confluence. It's a team collaboration space, so instead of emails, you can actually capture all the information required to be shared by your teams in a single product, which is a web application, Confluence. Jira Software is your agile project management and issue tracking system. So you can break down tasks, you can plan your sprints, you can assign your tasks to different users in your team. Bitbucket is a Git repository management system, and Bamboo is a continuous integration and deployment tool. So before we begin, the title is actually called a DevOps story. So what we're going to be looking at is different personas, different people with different characteristics, and on how they use these different tools. I'm going to introduce you to a team of 5 members, and each of these different members are a different persona. So Harvey is the product manager. Alana is a dev team lead. Kevin is our developer. Kevin and Emma, we have another Kevin there, Kevin and Emma from the release engineering team. So each of these people have a different use case when they use those different tools that we were looking at earlier. Harvey, being the product manager, might only be interested in defining a very high-level feature, and he's interested in shaping the future of a product that you're working on, or a project that you're working on. He doesn't necessarily have to go into the details of each epic or each user story that's going to be written, but he wants to keep track whether the feature that your team is going to be working on is currently progressing and there are no roadblocks in the complete process. So his use case of the tool is just defining requirements and at a very high level get metrics on how those features are progressing. Anyone here fit that persona of product managers? Or cool. Let's go to the dev team. So Alana and Kevin are from the development team. Alana is a dev team lead. Kevin is the actual developer who's going to be working on user stories. For Alana, her focus is to make sure that for the sprint, whatever the team has estimated and prioritized and taken up for the sprint are running smoothly, and that goes into completion. And for Kevin, it's to make sure whatever he's assigned to work on is going to be done with high quality and goes into production or whatever environment they choose to. Kevin and Emma are from release engineering and testing team, and for them, the focus is on automation. What they want to do is reduce all of those manual efforts or manual tasks that are involved in a deployment process or the testing process, and they're more interested in automating as much as possible so they can use their time to do more better things for the team. So there have been several other experts here in yesterday and in the next next days that's going to be talking about DevOps as a concept. Our focus is more about implementing a DevOps workflow. So we take that theory and we put that into practice in this talk. And we're going to focus on two key themes that every successful DevOps team find critical when deploying or implementing these systems. One is the flow of work or the flow of information from when you start thinking about an idea to when it gets into production as some piece of code. And this is really important. This is important for everyone from the product manager to a developer involved in the whole process to understand how this work is coming in and how it's flowing through the different channels. Who are the different teams involved? Who are the different key players in each of these processes? How do I reduce all of those handoffs? And how do I make sure there's a smooth transition and flow of information happening throughout the process? The second key theme we're going to be looking at is amplifying feedback. Now, when I say amplifying feedback, we want to give you the right information to make key decisions as early on in the process as possible. So we don't want to wait till we cut a release to identify that there's not 3 source commits that hasn't been included in a build, for example, or there are 20 bugs that we haven't addressed. We want to find that out as soon as we make a source code change, rather than waiting till the end of the sprint or towards the release dates. So we want to get all of that information as and when this information is passing through the development lifecycle. Great, so let's get started. Like I said, this is a DevOps story. So on the top right of every slide, you will see the key players that we were looking at earlier, and each of those slides is pertinent to what they are interested in. So it's a Monday morning, we arrive in our offices, and the development team sits down to a backlog of items. How many here are new to a screen like this where you have a backlog of items that your team starts working on? Awesome. So this is a Jira backlog on the Scrum board, and these are all the things that has come in that your team needs to estimate, prioritize, and start taking up into your sprint. On the other side, the product management team sits down to Confluence. And Confluence, like I said, is where you can capture all the documents, you can manage your files and everything in terms of collaboration. You can capture that as blueprints in Confluence, which you can use blueprints to capture that information into Confluence. What we're looking at here is a requirements document where the product management team actually sits down, flushes out a requirement, and plans what is the work involved in actually completing this feature. So first thing we want to do is understand requirements. And at Atlassian, we truly believe that every Confluence requirement, or every requirement that comes in, is a collaborative piece of work. And the whole company has access to any feature that we are planning. So for example, if product manager Harvey here creates a page on Confluence about a requirement or an idea or a plan that he has for the product's future, everyone in the company has access to the document to come in and comment and tell us more about what they think this feature can be improved, or they're happy with it, or they're not happy with some of those features. So it's a very open form of communication starting from your planning stage of whatever feature you're building. Now, once we have these requirements defined, we wanted to make it as simple as possible to convert these requirements into backlog items. Because once we have this plan committed into Confluence as a team, we say that this is all the different features we're going to be building, and these are all the different requirement items. Here we have a simple requirements table with 3 different features. What we wanted to do is make it as simple as possible to convert each of these items as a backlog item in Jira. So what we are looking at here is we are highlighting one single requirement, and we can simply, with a few clicks, create the whole requirements table into Jira as backlog items. So I'm going to be selecting which Jira project I want to create those issues in, what type of issue I want to create, and by clicking create, not only does it create those Jira issues, it also gives you a link back to that Jira issue right on the Confluence page. So anyone who was actually, from the product management team, anyone who was actually building out these requirements now has access to each of those backlog items and the status of that backlog item. We'll see how that works out in the next stage. Now this is great, so we have created each of these as a backlog item. The next thing we want to do is when a developer goes in and looks at that backlog item, we want to provide more context about why that backlog item has been created. So we've provided a link back to that original document from Confluence where that requirement or that backlog item originated from. Now, in my experience as a developer, when I was assigned to some of a bug fix or a new feature that I was working on, I always wanted more context to understand why I'm working on this piece of work. I don't want to go change a single line of code. I want to know more about why I'm making this change and how this impacts everyone else in the process or in that flow of information involved. And this might not be important for every issue that I'm working on, but when I'm working on a feature that creates something new in a product, I want to know as much as possible about how I'm contributing and where that requirement originates from or that backlog item originates from. So when I'm assigned, so in this case, Kevin is assigned to work on this, and by simply clicking on that link, takes him back to that requirements document where this backlog item was originated from. So the next step, once we have our requirements fleshed out, once we have our backlog items created, our developers start working on the Scrum board. In this case, Kevin now is logging in to Jira. He's greeted by a Jira dashboard where he sees a list of items he's worked on, he's assigned to, but he also has access to the sprint, which is the active current sprint that we're focusing on. Now, this board provides, he's currently working on TIS68, which is a Jira issue, might be a backlog item, might be a user story, but he's currently moving that item from to-do status to in-progress status just by dragging and dropping from the different columns available on the board. Now, this is a very powerful move. It's a very simple move, but it impacts a lot of different people involved in the process. Firstly, your team members now know what are the items in the pipeline. So if you have some capability to take up more work, when you've committed work as a team, you see that there's an issue sitting in to-do status, and if you have that availability to take up that item, you now have that visibility across the team to see who's working on what and how I can contribute to and move that to the final to done status. And for Alana, who's your lead, the same information is also available. So if they come into the sprint board, the sprint columns here, they know who's working on what and how things are progressing as a dev team lead. But going back to our product requirements, so how we actually started working on that requirement that we originally started in Confluence, now he has access to all of the different statuses of those requirements that was broken down. So without the developer actually having to update anyone else, the person who started with the original document in Confluence now can be updated of all the different statuses of the requirements that originated in that page. So this is great. You can actually log into the tool and you can see the different statuses as a product manager or as a developer or as a dev team lead. But this is more of a pull method where you actually have to log into the system. What we've also done is integrated these with tools like HipChat, which is a team chat application. And this movement of work that's happening in Confluence or Jira or any other system that you're using can automatically start sending notification to your team rooms. So everyone in your team who has who's in a single room is updated as soon as some action is performed on any of those different systems. This is really important in today's world, especially because we have so many distributed teams. Most of my team is in San Francisco, and when I have to log in the morning in Sydney, my HIP chat simply just gives me an update of everything that's happened in the last 12 hours that I missed out. Great. So we started with a requirements document in Confluence or a planning document in Confluence. We broke it down into different work items or backlog items. We've assigned it to developers. It's now time to start coding. How many here have used Git to develop software? Great. So I think there's been novels written in terms of what are the branching methodologies available for Git. So we're not going to get into what branching methodologies are available, but depending on your team's requirements, you might be using a feature branching workflow, you might be using Git flow, you might be using a forking workflow. So there's various different workflows available in Git. But what we wanted to do is mainly simplify that process of creating a branch when you're assigned to work on an issue. So in this case, Kevin has been assigned to work on TIS 49. And let's say Kevin has to log in, Kevin has to make some change to source code. So on the development panel, with one single click, you can create a branch straight from a Jira issue that goes to your version control system, in this case, Bitbucket. It automatically has filled in a branch name. It's also selected the repository and the type of branch. So all of this really helps your team by basically automating all of that branch naming conventions and things that you have to manually enter otherwise. So we created a branch, and we can now clone this repository, and what we're going to do is make some changes to the code, commit, push that to our server. We'll see how that kicks in the CI/CD part of our development workflow. So let's say the developer has completed all their work. We're going to make some change, push that commit. The next thing we want to do is, as soon as we make those changes, we want to make sure that all our test cases are running automatically as soon as I make a change to the branch. So I'm going to switch to my branch that I was working on earlier, TIS 68. I can go into the actual commit. And on top right, you see one build with a green tick. This is basically your continuous integration server, or in this case, Bamboo, actually running all those automated tests that you have configured as soon as you make a change to the source code. And if you click on that, it takes you straight into Bamboo, and you can see if the changes that you actually made, whether it actually broke a build or if it's actually passing all of the unit tests. And this is really important and useful information for a developer, because when I'm working on a source code change and any change that I make and push to the server, I want to be sure that the changes that I introduced is not breaking any of the existing tests that we have in place. So this is really useful information to have as soon as I make a source code change and commit and push to the Bitbucket server. Now let's say all of these test cases have passed, so we have a green build, and we do have a jar file or a war file that we want to deploy to a particular environment. Bamboo also has the concept of deployments, so I can go into a particular build plan, go to a particular deployment. I can select from one of the environments that I've configured. In this case, let's say I go into QA environment, and I can choose which particular release that we built from that plan can be deployed onto an environment such as QA. So these are all the different releases that I have available that originated from the build plan. I can choose one of those releases, and I can start deploying that onto one of the environments that I've selected. So this is cool because we started with the code change. We also automatically ran all the tests, and we have got it onto our QA environment. But what if something breaks? So we've integrated Bamboo as well with HipChat. So we have the concept of swarming, where you have a team room with all the team members available on that room, maybe with different geographic locations. So what we have done is, as soon as a Bamboo build breaks, it automatically notifies the team members on a HipChat room. And anyone who is available at that point of time is responsible for taking that up and making it green as soon as possible again. So if I'm working in Sydney and someone in San Francisco had made a change and they've pushed it and they've just left for the day, it's my responsibility to take that up, and HipChat notifies me that something's wrong and a build is broken. So let's see how we can avoid these situations of broken builds. We're going to talk a bit about code quality and code review. Anyone here has used the concept of pull requests? Pretty much everyone in the room. For those who are new, pull request is basically a review mechanism. So before I merge a branch into my development branch or master branch or any two different branches, I can select a few people to actually review the code that is going to be merged into the different branches. So creating that pull request is pretty straightforward. When you actually go to your commits into Bitbucket, you can choose and you can go to the branches and you can see how many ahead or behind the branches from the different branches that you're trying to merge. And in that branch, you can select which branch you want to merge into. So in this case, I'm selecting TIS68, bug fix branch is going to be merged into the master branch. And when I say create pull request, I have the option to select reviewers. So in this case, it might be Alana, and I'm going to select Emma. And as soon as I create this pull request, both Alana and Emma are automatically notified, saying they've been assigned to work on a pull request in Bitbucket. And we see pull requests being very much of a team sport. As soon as someone is assigned to work on a code review, all of the features like mentions and getting other people into that play is quite easy. In this case, we are looking at a single line of code, and we are commenting straight on the single line of code that we think is a good choice. But there might be cases where we are not so impressed with the code that's been written, and I can also comment again right on the same line of code to discuss whether this is something that we can improve, and then make those changes again before we actually merge those changes into the master branch. So you can have comments right at the code level, with a single code level, or you can also have at the pull request level, and you can accept or decline a pull request right within this, right within Bitbucket. Now, what you can also do is, in the pull request, it is automatically linked to a Jira issue. So if the person reviewing the code wants to know more about where this actually originated from, they can go straight to the Jira issue from the pull request that has been created and the ones that they have been assigned to. Now, what this does is improve the confidence for anyone who's actually approving these changes. So because our continuous integration jumped in and it has run all of those automated tests, and we have that coverage, and it's saying that our current builds are passing, anyone who's reviewing the code or anyone who's actually committed the code and making those changes are more confident that their changes that they've performed is not having a major impact on a production deployment, for example. And once we start using the pull request model, and once we have the code reviews in place, the first thing you'll want to do after everything passes is merge those branches. And merging also takes a very simple approach in this tool. So I simply clicked on merge, enter a commit message, and I can simply say merge, and it merges the two branches straight from your user interface here on the web tool. So quick recap, we started with our requirements in Confluence. We broke it down into different backlog items. We assigned it to Kevin. He made a simple source code change, committed the change to the Bitbucket server. It automatically started running the builds. We created a pull request. We had Alana and Emma review our code, and our automated tests were passing, so we actually merged that code in. So let's go straight into the end of the sprint. So after we have our sprint, we usually want to create a retrospective document. So for a sprint retrospective, what we have done is right within Jira on the sprint board, once you complete your sprint, so here in this case I'm going into an active sprint, but I do see some work log items that has not been completed, so I'm just going to move them first to the next sprint, and I click complete. As soon as I do that, it automatically gives me an option to create a retrospective straight from your sprint. And this is really important because at the end of each sprint, each team needs to discuss what went well, what can we improve in the next sprint, and all of that is captured in Confluence. So if you want to go back in time and see what you were thinking about 3 sprints back or 6 sprints back, all of that is available for your team. And we also notice in terms of behavior, people are a lot more open to talking about it or writing about it on a Confluence page than discuss in person. So we do open up this document for the next 4 hours or 6 hours, mention everyone on the page and let them comment on the page. We get a lot more valuable feedback on a page in Confluence than in person. But obviously we do have the in-person sessions as well. Any questions so far? Yeah. So in the next section, we're going to be talking about how we can release with confidence, and that goes into deployment and how you can package up something at this stage and then deploy it to a particular environment. So that's just coming up in the next section. Cool, so let's cover that and then we'll have more time for questions at the end of that. So we're gonna be talking about releasing a particular artifact once we have all that built. So in this stage, we have come to a stage where we have built an artifact, we want to deploy that into a particular environment. So Bamboo is a CI/CD tool, so we have build plans to actually implement your CI, and you also have deployment plans to deploy, to build your deployment plans. So first, let's take a look at how we can trace a build back to a Jira issue. So the whole concept here is to start from a requirement and have that traceability throughout till your artifact is built or your build plan succeeds or passes or fails. So let's take a look at how that sits together in Bamboo. So I can actually go into deployment. I can choose a particular environment. So in this case, I'm taking a particular release. So this bug fix that we had approved. And you'll notice here that if I actually go to the branch that actually built that particular artifact, I have that linked to a Jira issue TIS 112. So from a build plan or a deployment plan, I can link back or go back to that issue that it originated from in Jira. So once we have all of that, we want to, let's take 2 different examples. We're going to take a look at how we can manually deploy that artifact into production. In this case, it might be Emma, who's from the release engineering team, gets into the deployment projects. Let's get into a production environment. So this is a deployment plan. We have 3 different environments configured. I can get into the logs, make sure all the builds are passing, and I can go into deployment and select which environment I want to deploy to. So in most cases, most teams still prefer to actually have a manual deployment into production. So I went into production, and in this case, I can see that there is one task that runs when I actually run that deployment plan, and I can select a particular release, click deployment, and that is deployed onto a particular environment that I'd selected. So this is more of a manual method of taking a build from one of the build plans or taking a release and deploying that into one of the environments we have configured. But most teams these days have actually switched to using the Release Hub. Release Hub in Jira basically provides a lot of advantages in terms of managing your releases. So in this case, I'm looking at version 1.9. We haven't been able to complete that particular issue in version 1.9. So let's move that to the next version that we're going to be focusing on. So that's 2.0. And I'll go back to version 1.9 now, and I'll just make sure that all of my issues are done. There are no warnings. There are no issues left to do. And on the top right, I have the release option. I can simply click on release, choose which plan I want to run. I can even override some of the variables if I have to, and select a release date and release it into whatever plan that has been linked to into that deployment. So from the Release Hub, I can make sure that there are no warnings, so there are no open code reviews, there are no builds, there are no issues that are not yet complete. I can make sure the version is fine and then start or trigger a build process and deployment plan straight from the deployment Release Hub within Jira. So in the build plan itself, so you can't link a particular environment to Jira, but what release or what deployment artifact has gone into that particular environment is available right on the Jira issue. So if you go to a particular Jira issue, and you can actually see what are the branches that you have created, what are the commits that has been performed, and who's committed the performs, who's made those changes. You can also see the pull request that has been approved, who's approved it. And you can see the build plan, whether it has passed or failed, and you can see which environment that particular issue is associated with and deployed to. Correct. So that depends on your build plan and your deployment plan. So basically, there are two different aspects in Bamboo. One is the build plan, where you can configure what are the things I want to do from the source code after a commit is performed. So let's take an example of a jar file that you want to build using Maven or something like that. So you might have a repository in Bitbucket. In this case, Kevin actually checks out that, clones that repository, makes that changes, pushes the commits. At that point, your build plan is configured to say what you want to do with that. So it might be Maven clean, it might be Maven package, and then you build an artifact that is shared with your next stage, which is the deployment plan. So in the deployment plan, you can say, use this. You can firstly configure different environments, so like QA, staging, and production. And in that case, you can say, as soon as the build plan completes, automatically trigger my deployment plan and put it into QA environment or a development staging environment. So that depends on how you have configured your deployment plan in Bamboo. Great, we're going to have some more time for questions, but let me quickly wrap up what we have discussed so far. We started with a requirement in Confluence, or a plan in Confluence, about a feature that we wanted to build. We moved all of that. We actually defined each of those as backlog items, moved that into Jira Software as backlog items. We then made some source code changes, performed a pull request, did some code review, approved those changes, and moved that into Bamboo for continuous integration and deployment. So we actually had a build plan that run, which actually passed. We used that artifact that was built, and we deployed it into a particular environment. We also looked at how you can manually deploy those plans onto a particular environment if you wish to do so. But throughout this process, we were looking at two key themes. One was the flow of information. And what we have done throughout this process is made all of that work more visible. So anyone, even from the product management team who started with that Confluence page, can track the progress of that work with links within the Confluence page straight into a deployment plan. And we limited work in progress as well, because using concepts like the sprint board or the scrum board, your whole team has visibility. Even the integration with HipChat, your whole team has visibility on how things are progressing throughout the life cycle. And there are some automation features that can be enabled as well. So for example, as soon as a code review is created, the Jira issue can automatically move statuses from in progress to code review. So there are some automation features that can also be applied to reduce that manual handoffs in the entire process. And the second thing we wanted to focus on was amplifying the feedback, so we get faster feedback about the changes that we are making and how we are impacting all the different teams that are involved in the process. We're also looking to focus on quality at source. So as soon as we make a change, we are letting the developers know if they're breaking any of the critical builds. And we also introduced the concept of swarming, where a Bamboo build fails, we automatically get notified in a HipChat room, and anyone who's active in that room has the responsibility to take that up and bring that build back into green status. With that, I always like to leave about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A time. If anyone has any questions for the process, happy to answer.
Hi, are you able to hear me now? Yeah, so as soon as I raise a pull request, our build will get kicked off, correct? In the Bamboo or whatever is the continuous integration tool I'm using.
Let me try and answer here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So your question was, as soon as a pull request is created, when the builds tick off? Is that?
No, my question is down that line. So once the build gets kicked off, there will be some quality tools like Sonar or something else will also get started, and it will have some metric. So currently developer has to go to Sonar dashboard to see those metrics. As you are showing an icon like build is success or not, won't it be possible for you to send the SonarQube metric also back onto a Git SCM or something?
Yeah. So one of the things you can look up is the Atlassian Marketplace. So we have a site, marketplace.atlassian.com, which basically provides integrations and add-ons to the products to integrate with products like Sonar. So you can definitely use, there is actually a plugin that's available that connects with Sonar, and you can build that as a stage in your build plan that also provides those metrics back to you in the build process. Any other questions?
All the team members can give their opinion about what went well and what didn't go well. And can we generate report of that too?
Report of your retrospective itself?
I mean, can we have, for every sprint, we'll have the retrospective, right? It will be in the Jira itself?
No, it'll actually be created as a page in Confluence.
Okay.
So it is simply a document about all the things that your team had discussed in terms of what went wrong and what you want to improve in the next sprint. In terms of reporting on that, they're always available as documents, but there are no automated reports or anything that's coming out of retrospective documents. Yeah.
Understand how do we integrate it. I still have a question of how do we integrate it with our custom pipelines and custom environments when we say deploy. So do we need to have some additional configuration for
yes.
that?
So let me try and go back to that slide. Give me 1 second. Let me just try and open that slide. So what you're looking at here is on the top you have two different options. One is build and one is your deploy dropdown. Okay. Build plans are plans that you can configure to actually package your applications or run your unit tests or the Sonar integration and everything that you want to do there. Deployment plans are the different environments you have configured to actually take the artifact that you build in your build plan and deploy that onto a particular environment.
Okay.
So you'll have to create a deployment plan
yeah.
in which you configure different environments.
Yeah.
And then you can, in that deployment plan, you can say, as soon as my build completes, and if it has passed all the unit tests,
Yeah.
automatically deploy that
Yeah,
artifact
so
that's generated.
auto deployments can
Correct.
also be allowed. Okay, thank you.
Any other question? Great. Thank you so much for your time. Does that wrap it up? Great. Thank you so much.